Yes, sir. Currently, I'm the in-school suspension teacher for my school, but I had been working, and I was put in that role to essentially address office referrals and school referrals. And I still brought Filipino martial arts into that role as well. I started doing Filipino martial arts in the school. So let me backtrack a second.
Yeah.
My 16th year in education as my career. Most of those years have been a special ed teacher. And I found that going back even farther, I began my special education career actually as a special education student. So I was a student who was identified with learning targets, and so I had an IEP in school and spent a lot of my time in special ed settings. So I was kind of familiar with that. And then I started as a para, which is like an assistant to a special ed teacher in 2007, I think, 2006, 2007. And I noticed that a lot of kids had crossing the midline issues. So things like tying their shoes, or if they wrote on the board, they could get to a certain part and then they would struggle a second to go past. So I noticed that like crossing midline was a huge struggle. And so when I started teaching special ed, I was always obviously training with Guru and Asano as well. So, my routines, especially on my weekends, used to be work till Friday, get off work on Friday, travel someplace to see Guru, train, have a blast, travel back Sunday night, wake up and start my work week. And something clicked in me in about my 10th year. I was watching some of Paul McCartney's from his Cognitive College stuff.
Yeah.
And they were talking about, and I watched some of his TED Talks and some of his things.
Me too.
And it was super great, inspiring, because on there, he does a breakdown of how the brain functions and how we have different parts of our brain focus on things. And I noticed that a lot of children who struggle, and I don't even really like the term struggle because I think everybody's got something going on with them. And I think that what happens with a lot of kids is they're either dealing with their own personal trauma, they've got their own biochemistry that's working, and that might make them anxious or antsy or upset for whatever reason. It's hard for them to focus. And so we usually kind of tell ourselves the story that the quiet kid is the one who's working, right?
Yeah.
The quiet kid is the one who's learning. That's the best kid. But sometimes those kids that are a little bit off the wall, outside the box thinkers, those are some of your best kids. So anyway, I had the opportunity about 10 years ago to start teaching self-contained again at the middle school level. Tried introducing just Sinawali as a practice. And what I started to do was use pool noodles, and I would have the kids do Heaven 6. And we started working on just getting the kids cooperatively to do that. And this was pre-COVID. So there's obviously a couple things that goes on in the story. Sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit.
No,
but
you're good. I'm following.
What ended up happening was, as I started making a commitment that we would do it a minute a day, I noticed that a lot of behaviors and social interactions with the kids seemed to improve. So what I noticed was, if they did Heaven 6 for a minute a day, and we would do a minute and we try to work to the goal of not speaking to each other, not saying anything, working on our breathing while we're doing that binary rhythmic motion, really committing to doing it for a minute. There's something about that made transitions, classes easier, made independent concentration go up a little higher. And I noticed the kids were kind of nicer to each other, because the thing about Filipino martial arts is it's different than, let's just say, karate. And I'm a big Taekwondo guy. I started doing Taekwondo when I was a kid in boxing. And you can do Taekwondo forms on your own. So you can go up and say, hey, I'm going to practice my kata or my form by myself. But in Filipino martial arts, you really need another partner. You can do some solo stuff, but you really need that person giving you that rhythm back and forth. And so what I noticed, what was fascinating for me to see, was when the children would start to teach each other, we had to kind of have like little mini conferences and tell them stuff like, hey, if if you're a little bit nicer, you're a little more encouraging, this is going to help that other kid learn this. And it was interesting to kind of watch them regulate themselves. It was a really cool privilege to see. Yeah. So I did that. So that was my first experience with it. And I said, hey, you know, there's something there. There's something here. Okay. Well, then what was really inspiring, what was really cool for me was, you know, how every time you write, every time you have to re-up with Guru, you know, you got to write letters.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Intentions,
what you're doing. So I kind of put a little blip in there. I re-up and I put a little blip in there. I go, you know, hey, Guru, just so you know, I'm teaching, you know, 8th grade, you know, special ed. I'm putting this in there. And I saw him in July of that year. I think it was July 2018 at Pat Trey's school in Virginia. And he saw me and he's like, hey, how's that going? Like, he actually remembered that I did it. And that gave me a little bit of the push. Like, you know, all right, he actually notices this and the kids really like it. Seems like it's going to fit. So I'm going to do it again. Well, I kept introducing it the next year. And then what happened was we did this thing in our school called Pick Your Passion. And the kids didn't know what they were doing. And I think I called it sensory. I think I called it like sensory strengthening or something. Huh. And so I'm calling it sensory strengthening. And these kids sign up for the class. They don't know what it is. You know, and what was interesting was the kids started really liking it. And I would kind of explain to them who Guru was and explain to them what Filipino martial arts was and how this was helping their coordination. And I had kids from a variety of backgrounds that really started to take to it because I think they enjoyed the rhythm of it. And there's a little bit of expression, especially when I show them, hey, when you go down the line this way, you can go up the line the other way. So we have down, we have up. You know, you guys can mix these patterns up. I remember a kid one time, it was so fascinating to me. I had a kid tell me this is what I learned. I told Guru the story, and he really, I thought he liked it. So I thought it was kind of neat. Was that I had one kid who, you know, had some trauma in their background. So they didn't want to do it with me. They go, I don't want to do it. I just want to watch. And I said, that's fine. You know, you can, you know, you just want to watch. And the child was relatively behaved. And then one day, this kid just gets up and he can do Heaven 6. I sat there and do Heaven 6 and did it really good. And I go, how'd you learn to do that? And he goes, I just watched you. He goes, I watched and I followed the directions. And he goes, and I went like this, Mr. Stumpf, and I just went forehand, backhand, backhand, forehand, backhand. You know, and it was kind of neat. You know, it was kind of neat to see him pick it up. So that was my first real pickup. And then after the pandemic, my principal made a schedule change, which was very, very much like an education experience where I'm walking in. I don't know what my schedule is going to be. So I got kids in like 3 days. I had to prep. And I look on a schedule, it says adaptive PE. And I'm like, adaptive PE? Like special ed PE? My principal's like, yeah, you can do that. And I thought, well, here we go.
Fair enough.
So the first thing I do is I meet my kids, and I get about 8 or 9 kids in an adaptive PE class with a range of educational identifications. So I had some kids with identifications of Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. I had some with autism and things like that. And so I was kind of looking at their goals, looking at their IEP goals, and some of them had a lot of movement and sensory-based things as goals. And I thought, well, you know, this is perfect for them. So I just introduced a Sinawali unit. I said, and I let the kids pick. I always let the kids pick because it's really important in education that children, I think, regardless of their educational identification or IQ, wherever they're at, it's very important that they have a choice and a voice in their education and where they're going.